1, 2, 3.
The following is the full conversation from our episode Not Wanted at Harvard, BIPOC Media on Claudine Gay, Anti-Zionism, and Diversity in Education. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to our supporting monthly members. Become a monthly member by going to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends.
The resignation of Claudine Gay, a widely esteemed scholar and the first Black president of Harvard University, and that place's 387 years, revealed a lot, both about how America is failing at its highest ideals and about how anti-Black backlash campaigns work in this country. A politically motivated grilling in Congress, followed by an organized campaign to attack Gay's credibility and intellect, fed an ongoing assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in education, and coupled that with the especially toxic accusation right now that diversity was somehow increasing campus anti-Semitism. Much of this was familiar. After all, we've seen years of trumped-up campaigns against truthful education and critical race theory in schools. And just last year, the right scored a huge victory, one that they'd been after for decades, when the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action. In some ways, what was different this time was actually the support Gay had and the pushback that was seen and heard, especially from people of color in the media and in the independent Black and Brown-owned media itself. Today, we're going to look at some of that pushback and consider why the failure to understand racism and sexism and how they intersect is still so important, not just for Black women and all women of color, but for anyone's dream of a multiracial democracy. Joining our monthly Meet the BIPOC Press discussion this time are Zaire Dinzey-Flores, professor and chair of Latino and Caribbean Studies at Rutgers University, and Jamiee Swift, who is the founder and executive director of Black Women Radicals. I'm also happy to welcome as co-host this time Amir Khafagy, labor reporter for Documented, which is a member of the URL Media Network. And URL, as you may recall, is an independent network of media owned and operated by people of color. It is great to have you, all of you, but especially Amir. Welcome.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited. I really have been thinking about this for some time. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. With the recent controversy around Dr. Gay and the repression of anti-Zionist speech in the media and in academia, I find this trend very troubling. As both our guests already know, people of color are not strongly represented in the media and in academia. They are usually white-dominated spaces. Although there's a push to diversify these spaces, it can feel that our voices and our unique perspectives that we bring to these spaces could be demonized. But not only that, it could even be punished. Turning to you, Zaire, you wrote a recent piece about Dr. Gay in Grio, and I was wondering if you could speak more about what the controversy means to people of color in academia and in the media.
Yeah, well, I am happy to be here to talk about this important topic, and thanks for having me. When I learned of Dr. Gay's resignation, I thought it was important to voice what many, I think, Black women, academics in particular, were feeling, seeing the events unfold. And it is representative of the conditions that we face in academia. Black women and faculty, and also as Black women leaders. And generally, I would say even people of color faculty, but especially Black women and women of color faculty. And that is constant scrutiny, questioning of our motives and capacity, and also whether we are competent to be teachers. And for those of us who dare explore academic leadership, whether we can hold those positions. So it was a reminder of how difficult and treacherous the road in academia is for those of us who don't represent the majority. And so I thought it important to write about that.
Yeah. Jamiee, coming to you, I'd love to hear your reaction as you watch this play out. And especially, I don't know about you, but I began to feel shades of McCarthyism, but maybe of a new sort playing out in front of us.
Yes, what we experienced or saw with Dr. Gay is definitely a form of McCarthyism in a different era, correct? And so what we're seeing is the misogynoir, the racism and sexism that Dr. Gay faced as a Black person, as a woman, but as a Black woman in this position. And we've been seeing these right-wing attacks happen throughout the past few years, particularly against Black feminist theories such as intersectionality, right, and critical race theory. We've seen how Kimberly Crenshaw has been attacked for her theoretical frameworks. We've also seen pushbacks against anything dealing with queer and trans studies or gender studies, right? And so this is a continuum of what we've seen throughout the past few years, but also a larger history where these institutions, the ivory towers never wanted Black people and people of color, right? We, as Black people, we were not even allowed to have access to education, which is why historically Black colleges and universities were created, right? And we even see attacks against HBCUs as well. And so when we think about Dr. Gay, I think about how we lauded her for being the first Black woman president at Harvard University's tenure, but we should be so disappointed and disgusted that she was the first Black woman president, right, at Harvard University. It shows that these institutions, whether they promote DEI or this aesthetic of inclusivity, they do not want us here. If the university is supposed to be the marketplace of ideas, why are Black people and people of color's ideas, advocacy, activism always targeted, surveilled, and pushed out? And so
we're going to get, I'm sure we'll get back to more of that. I mean, it is true that that number, 387 years, kind of washes by you. But when you think about it, it's chilling. The other chilling aspect, though, and where I see the McCarthyism was Dr. Gay had pretty early last fall disavowed anti-Semitism, spoken up against rising anti-Semitism on campus. But then we saw this kind of effort, particularly I'm thinking of the congressional hearings, but also in what happened, to require her to say it over and over again, or in different ways. And I'd love to hear from you, Jamiee, about that aspect. How do you see that adding to what you've described as a fairly familiar scenario?
I see it in multiple ways, and I believe that multiple truths can exist, right? I believe that there was a witch hunt against Dr. Gay because she's a Black woman. I do think that people were forcing her over and over again to prove her leadership, her presidency as a Black woman. And three, we also see where, and this is where the multiple truths can exist, where even though Dr. Gay experienced this misogynistic or misogynoiristic witch hunt, she also, according to students and faculty and staff, failed to protect Palestinian, Black, and other allied students, faculty, and staff who support the pro-Palestinian cause, right? And so this is the precarity of Black leadership in academia, but in other places, right? Where she has some sort of way had to choose between disavowing anti-Semitism, which is very real. We're not going to deny that, but also to disavow other marginalized communities, such as Palestinian, Black, and other allied students with the pro-Palestinian cause, right? So where does she fit into this place, right? And this shows that DEI is not working. DEI is not a liberatory politic, because if DEI was a liberatory politic, Dr. Claudine Gay would be able to speak truth to power to both anti-Semitic, right, and also anti-Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian attitudes, forces, beliefs, right, at Harvard or anywhere else she lays her feet or steps.
Now, I went to Queens College in CUNY in New York City, and it was a very diverse school. Previous to that, I went to LaGuardia Community College, and that was also very diverse. It had a high representation of Black and Latino students. I felt very comfortable in that institution. So, Saide, you had previously mentioned that you had attended Harvard for your undergrad. And I
Yeah.
was wondering, did you feel like you faced more scrutiny or you were held to unrealistic higher standard than the white student body?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is true of any predominantly white institution, that we really, for those of us who are not thought of as belonging there or not perceived to be, there for our own merit or because we were able to get there, there are subtle and sometimes direct ways in which our presence there is questioned. And that this is true, I think, of Harvard, and it's true of any institution, predominantly white institution especially, which are most of the institutions we inhabit, right? So, I went to college in the 90s, wherein affirmative action was experiencing challenges then, and questioning about whether we got in for those reasons or whether, we're intelligent enough to be there. What are the markers? How do we get there? Those have always been true. I mean, we see it still in debates around standardized testing. We see it in debates around what kinds of racial information, race information is going to be included in applications, how class figures in all of this. So yes, I think that's a standard experience for any professional student in predominantly white institutions. And I would argue even if and when they're diverse, I don't think that, places like LaGuardia, or Queens College are exempt from this.
See, that's a very good point. It makes me think of something that Jamiee had said previously, that universities have never truly loved Black academics structurally, and that historically Black people were never really allowed into those spaces. Given the fact that Dr. Gay obtained the highest administrative role in Harvard and essentially serving as the mouthpiece for Harvard, a historically white supremacist institution, what does that say about the future of Black people and people of color in general in these institutions, Jamiee?
I think it says a lot. For one, these institutions do not love us. I want to make that very clear. They've actually killed us. And I can speak to a recent example, a horrible example of Dr. Antoinette Candia Bailey, who is the vice president of student affairs at Lincoln University, Missouri, which is a historically Black university. And she was dealing with a lot of mental health issues and concerns and spoke about it to the white university president, Dr. John Mosley, and her cries for help were overturned or overlooked, and she ended up sadly committing suicide. So one, these institutions never have loved us. They never wanted our theoretical frameworks, leadership, activism, scholarship really to be incorporated into the university. And we've seen that through protests at San Francisco State University, then college, where we had these third world liberation strikes where Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous students fought for more representation, right, at the university. We saw this at Howard University in the late 1960s, where Black students protested to have more curriculum about Black people at a Black university. So what we're seeing is nothing new, in the sense this is a long history of Black people and people of color advocating for our rights and our perspectives in academia. But I think it's also structurally, right? It's not just academia. It's health. It's in the private sector. It's corporations, right? And so we are coming up as we gear up for this next election, right? We are seeing more and more this push out of this backlash to DEI. So my offering is that we recognize that our lives come first, our health and wellness comes first, and that we are not slaves to this institution, right? And we will live and not die by these institutions as well.
Well, to follow up on that, Jamiee, we introduced you and talked about how you were co-founder of Black Women Radicals. You also teach at an institution. What's this experience been like for you? And do you think it is possible to actually be a Black woman radical in an institution? And if so, why?
I think my experience has been very interesting. So I come out of the tradition of Howard University. I got my PhD in political science at Howard University, a historically Black university. And so for me, having the experience, like Amir talking about LaGuardia and Queens College, obviously it's diverse. But to Zaire and her talking about just because there are these white institutions, right, that have historically subordinated Black people does not mean that these things don't happen at Black institutions, right? Because Black people are not monolithic. We're heterogeneous, right? And we have different experiences. But coming out of teaching or being at a HBCU to a PWI, it's very interesting given that I'm one of the very few Black women in my department, Black people in my department, right? So there's this expectation of me to come in and undo the legacies of not teaching about Black people. I study power, so I study Black politics, right? So it's me coming and having to teach these students who do not know anything about Ralph Bunche or Drew Lamar Presage or all these prolific Black academics. And that in turn puts pressure on me, right? That in turn puts pressure on me to not only be an academic, a colleague, but also a therapist to Black and people, Black and students of color, right? Also therapists and dealing with the other issues that my colleagues who are of color have to deal with. And so it's multifarious in the positions. It's not just that I get to teach and come back home, right? Like the expectation is to me to do all these things, and that is what's killing us, right? Doing all these things, being responsible for all these different people and aspects. But what about us? One thing I would like to offer is that there's been several Black women academics who've passed early because of the pressure of getting tenure, because the pressure of the performativity and to be the Black face in this high space. I think about Barbara Christian, who passed away. I think about many other Black women in academia who were also activists, right? Like Toni Cade-Bambara, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, who've passed away due to some sort of disease. So I do think that I can be a Black woman radical in academia because of this lineage of Black women in academia. But I also recognize that I cannot put all my life and politics into this place that does not want me to be there.
Amir?
I was wondering, and you brought up a lot of good points, Jamiee, but I was thinking for Sayadaw, you've written previously about Puerto Rico and the gated communities that exist there, and I was wondering if you can speak about some of the parallels between, I guess, the Palestinian liberation movement and the Puerto Rican experience on the island and in the United States.
Yeah, so I've written about gated communities in Puerto Rico and the way that the built environment is utilized to sort of like control and reproduce racial and class distinctions in Puerto Rico. And I mean, of course, talking about Puerto Rico being one of the oldest colonies in the world, and the ways in which colonial policies are established. It's obviously there are parallels there with Palestine, and so I think what is tough is when you are doing scholarship in the context of empire and colony and teaching about it, to the point that Jamiee was making about how difficult it is to be a scholar and navigate institutions, and so protecting your health, but also your livelihood and your capacity to, exist. And we are hypervisible, and we are often drawn in to talk about, the things that stab at the heart, that address our own particular survival. So I think that's what's hard in this case in dealing with a very sort of a minefield of an issue. And I saw it in the way in which Claudine Gay navigated that, and I see it every day, and I experience it every day in navigating these topics that become the target of ideologues and political fervor.
You're listening to the full uncut interview from our Meet the BIPOC Press series. This episode is titled Not Wanted at Harvard, BIPOC Media on Claudine Gay, Anti-Zionism, and Diversity in Education. Laura is joined by co-host Amir Khafagy, a labor and immigration reporter for Documented. Their guests are Zaire Dinzey-Flores, professor and chair of Latino and Caribbean Studies at Rutgers University, and Jamiee Swift, the founder and executive director of Black Women Radicals. You can find all of our Meet the BIPOC Press episodes in our archives by searching lauraflanders.org. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to our members. Please show your support by becoming a monthly supporter or making a one-time donation at lauraflanders.org/donate.
At the very top, Zaire, I mentioned that I thought there was something different in this particular scenario because we've seen a growth in independent media owned and operated by people of color. You wrote your piece for the Griot. There are many more part of the URL network and beyond. Am I right in thinking that maybe at least in that respect, we're seeing some change? Or is this a rosy tinted glass being applied to what's going on? Zaire?
I mean, I think that there was quite a bit of attention to Claudine Gay's sort of what she was going through and what was happening at Harvard. But I'll tell you what I think was missing. I think there was quite a bit missing. There was no reporting on Black academics in general, right? A greater breadth. There was little reporting on what academia is like. So even when the conversation turned to plagiarism, there was little kind of discussion of the processes for academic review and how that happens and what it's like for Black academics and academics of color to face those processes. And there was also, I think, a lot missing on Black alums of these elite institutions. And we saw, and I was, part of, Black alums that were getting together and talking and sort of, noting what was happening institutionally. And I think that got very little attention. And so the most of the attention went to these wealthy white men that are Harvard alums, and it reproduced the very same inequities that exist with respect to institutions.
So as an Arab American who works in the media, I find the conversation around Palestinian liberation and the current war on Gaza very frustrating. It doesn't seem that the mainstream media is getting it right. And it seems the same thing is happening around this conversation about Dr. Gay and the university's response to what's going on now with the Palestinian, the attack on Gaza and with the Palestinian liberation movement. And I was wondering if you, Jamiee, could talk a little bit about what do you think the media is getting right about the controversy and what is it getting wrong and what do you wish could be added to that conversation?
That's a great question. I think what media, particularly Black and people of color operated media, is getting correct is that it was a witch hunt. This is attack against Dr. Claudine Gay because she's Black and she's a woman. She's a Black woman, right? And those intersections are so critical. But what is also missing to me, and this is where the multiple truths perspective comes in, that she did not want to protect Palestinian, Black, and other marginalized students who are pro-Palestinian, right? Because what we're seeing is that across the universities and many other sectors, if you say ceasefire now, we want to end the genocide from the river to the sea, these are being equated to being anti-Semitic statements, and they're not. If the university, like I said before, is supposed to be a marketplace of ideas, why isn't Palestinian liberation and talking about the genocide that is happening, and also genocides occurring in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan and other parts of the world? Why is there such contention to say we want to free Palestine, or we want to end the genocide, or we want the liberation of Palestinian people, which is connected to Black liberation, right? And so I think that's also missing as well. Yes, she was in a precarious position, but as president and also other faculty, administration, and staff, we're supposed to be, right, in the interest of all of our students and not just a few or not just some. And so I think that's also the piece that is missing. And also class analysis. What does it mean to be able to go to these institutions, right? Whether you're students, faculty, or staff or not, and to be in this position, right? And to be seen as the mouthpiece of all intellectuality, when in the case where there's other people who can have access to these institutions. What about poor students? What about all these different things? And so there's privilege here, but there's also obviously anti-Black racism and sexism here. And so I think that needs to be interrogated more.
We profiled a documentary not so long ago on the fight for African and Puerto Rican studies at the Brooklyn College, which had both a shocking story of what happened to the protesters, being detained and on crazy charges, but also a story of people coming together across all sorts of differences, Black, white, you name it. The other piece of this picture, it seems to me, that reporting missed was the nature of the support on the campus for Claudine Gay, and also the concern that students who identify as Jewish actually have about anti-Semitism coming from the right, coming from conservatives who have long been, bound up their racism with anti-Semitism, and we've seen examples of that recently. So I don't know about you, but I would have liked to see more reporting on that. And I'm wondering, Zaire, if that's something that I just missed in the coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that this became a one person focused topic rather than one that really emphasized the kinds of fault lines that were being put at play. So the people that were being positioned against the other. And I think we've seen this. I think this is a colonial logic at play, where let's make sure that we cannot find the ways in which these two groups or different groups come together and coalesce. And we've seen it before. We saw it with affirmative action, with the knockdown of affirmative action, the way in which Asian communities were put against or sort of like irreconcilable with Latinx and Black communities in having a position in education, in higher ed. And we see it here too, I think, with Jewish communities. I mean, to be clear, racism is an issue, classism, sexism, right? As are anti-Semitism, as are anti-Palestinian rhetoric, right? All of these are true and coexist. And so I think that the win of white supremacy is to suggest that they don't live together, and it was a strategic use of that rhetoric to put us against each other. And I think that we're all concerned for all of those things, and how do we sort of subvert and this trend to suggest that we are indeed against each other, when in fact we are all looking for representation. I mean, Harvard, not now, always has been a place where anti-Semitism could have thrived and thrived. Jewish people were not allowed, as Black people were not allowed in these institutions. As today we can talk about the ways in which Palestinian students are not allowed a voice, right, to speak over their realities of colonialism and violence. That is true. So I think that has been a strategic and unfortunately successful move on the part of the political right, and which has extended. They've successfully peddled these ideas.
Well, you bring up such a good point. It feels to me that there's like this new witch hunt, this new age of McCarthyism taking place, not only in academic spaces, but also media spaces. We're seeing reporters losing their jobs or being forced to resign because if they had a pro-Palestinian stance. We're seeing on that in academia, we're seeing students for justice for Palestinian groups on campuses being repressed, and new laws on campuses or regulations on campuses, and almost like in the McCarthy era where you had to denounce communism in order to get a job. So we're seeing these things grow now and take hold in these spaces. And I was wondering, either one of you can talk about how we can fight this new kind of witch hunt, this new age of McCarthyism taking place in the media and in academia.
Jamiee?
I think, like I've said before, this witch hunt we're seeing is a current manifestation of what has happened in the past. And for me, my responsibility is to speak truth to power. June Jordan, very well-known Black feminist poet, said Palestine is a litmus test. It's our litmus test, right? We've seen over 100 days of just horrid attacks and violence on Palestinian people. And so for me, I cannot just teach about politics and power and Black people, right? And theoretically speak about it, and then go out into the world and not do it in praxis. Assata Shakur, I'm paraphrasing, said, I just couldn't have my head in the books and read about theory about radical movements. I had to be out in the streets. And so one way that we can do these things is to speak truth to power. I liken this to a young non-binary Black radical by the name of Rhina Workman, who is at NYU Law and spoke out against, right, what was happening in Palestine, and they lost a well-paying job. And they were no longer serving as president of the club that they were at NYU. And so, of course, we're going to be the first ones attacked in our livelihoods and our, economic safety nets attacked. And I get that. But also, I think about, if I'm supposed to be a Black feminist, a Black woman radical, the same thing happened to June Jordan. She was ousted for writing poetry in support of Palestine. And so for me, I think we really need to continue to push and to, like I said, speak out about what's going on, because, like I said before, these institutions have never really wanted us anyway. And why hire us if you know this is what we theorize about? Why have us at these places if you know that these are our politics, right? That means that you don't accept my humanity. You don't accept who I am as a person. You just want me as a Black face in this place, and that's not who I am, and that's not me.
Jordan taught at many universities, but if you look at the archives of the New York Times, she goes from being a pretty regular commentator to the op-ed page to disappearing from that page after the comments that you mentioned around the Israeli bombardment of the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon in '82. Amir, closing questions, I guess. I mean, I'm left with this sort of, my usual question is the pushback that we're seeing, I mean, from the right and the sort of no pretenses, gloves off assault on any critique of the policies of the state of Israel, on inclusion, diversity, any efforts to try to tell the truth and create a academy that looks like America. Are we seeing such a kind of blatant pushback on all of that because the forces of progress are gaining some ground, not just demographics, but politically speaking, or not. I guess it comes back down to, and how do we get to a place where we can have the conversations we need to have here in this country and globally that get to the source of our problems? I mean, you want to talk about why Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. We can't even really plunge into the depth of that because we're so busy grappling with allegations and accusations of what can and cannot be said at this moment. So I don't know, Amir. That's a lot of questions in one brain, but where do we end this? How do we go forward?
Well, I like to think that maybe these strong attacks that we are facing is because maybe the movement is getting stronger, and there's a vulnerability that the right feels, and that's why they're attacking even stronger, and they're being even more dangerous than they ever have been. What I would like to ask our guest is kind of like, what small steps we can take to kind of fight this right-wing turn and this McCarthyist turn that we're seeing in our respected spaces. I don't know if Saide, you'd like to start and say just what we can do.
I would say that there are multiple fronts to this fight, and that we can address it from these multiple positions. My landscape is higher ed, and it's been interesting to see the likes of these people who are mobilizing to the service of the political right, and attacking DEI, and sort of thinking that they can learn what DEI means in like 2 hours in a visit, talking to 3 people and understanding what the terms are for how we think about equity, how we think about inclusion, how we think about racism. So, I mean, part of the reason that I wrote this piece is to educate people, hey, the higher ed has a long ways to go. Academia is not an inclusive space. Academia is a hard place for many people, and we have to decide that we want institutions that are diverse and inclusive of multiple viewpoints. I mean, that is progress. That's education. That's what we are in it for. So, the facts are the facts, and the truth is that we have been historically excluded, that we belong and that we contribute. I spoke of Du Bois. I wrote about Du Bois in the piece, and how Du Bois wasn't even recognized until very recently as the stalwart that he is in his contributions to science. And we see many examples of that, of other scientists, Black and people of color, who have contributed tremendously. So knowledge is power, and that's the front that I inhabit, and requires more information and knowledge from all of us.
Jamiee?
So for me, I think political education is so important. And previously I discussed how classism operates in academia, and there's so many people who do not have access to the literature, the texts, and things of that nature. And one of the ways we can fight back is through political and even popular education. My organization, Black Men Radicals, actually has a school called the School for Black Feminist Politics, where our mission is to transform and expand the frame of reference of Black politics through the power of Black feminisms. Through the school and also through BWR, we host free events, right, regarding Black politics, Black feminist politics, of things in that nature. And then we recently, of last year, had an event with Dr. Angela Davis and many others about this long history of Black and Palestinian feminist lineages and legacies, but particularly how Black feminists have been in solidarity with Palestine. There's also a reading list that accompanies this event. And so these are just some examples of if the institution is trying to block us from discussing and having a certain stance, now it's time for us as academics to be allied with our community, right? Many times we get in these positions and forget that we come from these communities, and or that these communities who are not academic adjacent are there doing the real groundwork. And so it's who are the organizations in your community? How are you connecting with them? What are some ways that you can promote political education, right, about Black and Palestinian histories that are co-entwined with each other, or just generally political education about, I would say, radical movements, right? Because we cannot rely on DEI to save us. It is us that's we're going to save each other. We have to save ourselves, particularly when we're seeing such backlash. So those are some of the actions I would advance for this.
Well, thank you all. It's been a great conversation and wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. And thank our guests. Thank you, Jamiee and Saide. We really appreciate your insights. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank you for having me and for this important conversation.
Thank you, Laura and Amir, for having me. It's been a really generative conversation. Thank you.
Meet the BIPOC Press is a special monthly feature of the program. You can get a lot more information and all our archives at our website.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to our full conversation from our episode Not Wanted at Harvard, BIPOC Media on Claudine Gay, Anti-Zionism, and Diversity in Education. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to our members. We are an independent media organization that is dependent on you. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter or making a one-time donation by going to lauraflanders.org/donate. Thanks for listening.